The workers at Brooklyn Navy Yard in December 1936 had no way of knowing they were building immortality. As they welded hull number 50 into existence, riveting her plates and shaping her armor, they were creating something far more significant than just another warship. The economic despair of the Great Depression had driven many of them to this work, but what they constructed would outlive nations and inspire generations yet unborn. The St. Louis class represented a revolutionary approach to naval architecture, a philosophy that emphasized overwhelming firepower coupled with the speed necessary to survive encounters with more heavily armored opponents. USS Helena would become the embodiment of this philosophy, though few could have predicted her ultimate destiny when her keel first touched the waves. From stem to stern, Helena measured 608 feet, her relatively narrow 6'1" beam designed for cutting through water with minimal resistance. But the true marvel of her design lay in her weapons system. 5 triple turrets housed 15 6-inch guns, each capable of sustained rates of fire that seemed almost impossible. The Mark 16 weapons could cycle rounds at 8 to 10 per minute under ideal conditions, meaning Helena's main battery could theoretically unleash 150 shells in a single minute. This extraordinary firepower would eventually earn her a nickname among Japanese sailors who faced her guns, a nickname that would follow her throughout her combat career and beyond. 8 additional 5-inch dual-purpose guns provided secondary armament, equally effective against aircraft or surface targets. Her propulsion system consisted of 4 Parsons turbines fed by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers capable of generating 100,000 horsepower, driving her through the water at 32.5 knots. With a range of 10,000 nautical miles, she could project American power across vast stretches of the Pacific Ocean. Yet, specifications and technical data reveal only part of Helena's story. The true measure of any warship lies not in her blueprints, but in the character of her crew, the 868 officers and men who would transform steel and engineering into something approaching legend. Helena's christening on August 27, 1938, in the East River marked her official entry into the world. The wife of Montana's senator shattered a champagne bottle across her bow, a ritual meant to confer good fortune upon the vessel. Whether that blessing would prove effective depended entirely on one's definition of luck. Following her commissioning in September 1939, Helena embarked on a cruise that took her south to Uruguay, where her young sailors encountered a sobering reminder of naval warfare's brutal realities. In Montevideo Harbor, the twisted wreckage of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee lay scuttled and abandoned, a monument to the Battle of the River Plate. American sailors stared at the mangled steel and wondered if similar fates awaited them. The questions raised by that encounter would soon demand answers. By September 1940, Helena had joined the Pacific Fleet, and the following months brought an endless cycle of gunnery drills, damage control exercises, and navigation training. The endless repetition served a crucial purpose, transforming civilians into warriors through the accumulation of small perfections. Every man aboard learned his station until the knowledge became instinctive, burned into muscle memory through relentless practice. As 1941 progressed and international tensions mounted, the Navy made modifications to Helena's defensive armament, installing new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns. These additions proved timely, though no one could have imagined just how soon they would be needed. The morning of December 7, 1941, found Helena moored at berth 1010 in Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard. Across the harbor, the battleships of the Pacific Fleet rested in a tidy row along Ford Island, the pride of American naval power arranged like ducks in a shooting gallery. By coincidence, the USS Pennsylvania, the mighty battleship that should have occupied Helena's berth, had been moved to dry dock for maintenance. This seemingly minor administrative decision would alter the course of both ships' histories. At 0757, Lieutenant Commander Shicharu Maratha led 9 Kate torpedo bombers through the morning haze toward what his pilots believed was the Pennsylvania. Helena's profile in the pre-dawn darkness bore enough resemblance to a battleship to seal her fate. Only the lead aircraft released its weapon, a Type 91 torpedo that knifed through Pearl Harbor's placid waters at 40 knots. The torpedo passed beneath the nearby mine layer Oglala and struck Helena at frame 75, just below her armor belt, detonating with catastrophic force. The explosion tore through her engineering spaces with the violence of a giant's fist, transforming ordered machinery rooms into twisted metal tombs in an instant. Engine room number 1 and boiler room number 2 ceased to exist as functional spaces, replaced by chaos and fire. Seawater rushed through a breach large enough to accommodate a truck, but Helena's crew had already begun fighting back. Within 120 seconds, her forward diesel generator roared to life, restoring electrical power to her gun mounts. As Japanese planes wheeled overhead for their second attack run, Helena's anti-aircraft gunners responded with defiance, their weapons speaking in staccato bursts of fire. 4 bombs straddled her during the second wave, each near miss showering her decks with shrapnel and steel fragments. When the attack finally ended and the smoke cleared, 40 of her crew lay dead and another 100 wounded, yet Helena remained afloat. The ship that should have been destroyed had survived through a combination of damage control expertise and human determination that would become hallmarks of her crew. The days following Pearl Harbor saw Helena transformed into what resembled an intensive care patient. Water sloshed through her wounded hull while emergency pumps worked ceaselessly to maintain her buoyancy. Yet beneath the visible damage beat a heart that refused to surrender. By December 9, just 2 days after the attack, she limped into dry dock number 2, where Navy Yard workers swarmed over her like surgeons attending a critical patient. Steel plates were cut, shaped, and welded to cover her wounds, temporary repairs designed to hold until she could reach a proper repair facility. The journey to Mare Island in January 1942 tested every weld and rivet as Pacific swells pressed against her patched hull, searching for weaknesses. Her crew maintained vigilant watch at damage control stations, ready to shore up any breach that might appear, but Helena held firm. At Mare Island, Helena underwent a transformation that transcended mere repair. The Navy had absorbed the lessons of Pearl Harbor at terrible cost, and Helena would benefit from that brutal education. Her conning tower, which restricted visibility during night actions, gave way to an open bridge. Where outdated 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns once stood, the Navy installed 4 quadruple 40mm Bofors guns, Swedish-designed weapons wrapped in American steel and determination. But the revolutionary change came in electronics. Helena received the new SG Surface Search Radar, a technological marvel that could penetrate darkness and fog to locate enemy vessels at ranges that seemed almost miraculous. Combined with new FC and FD fire control radars, Helena gained the ability to fight effectively in darkness, a crucial advantage in the type of engagement that awaited her in the Solomon Islands campaign. While darkness protected ships from visual spotting, radar gave Helena the ability to see without being seen, a decisive advantage. Under the command of Captain Robert H. English and later Captain Philip Gatch, who assumed command in September 1942, Helena's crew trained with fanatical intensity. They had accounts to settle with the Japanese Empire. Gunners drilled until loading and firing became reflexive actions performed even in sleep. Damage control teams practiced their emergency procedures until responses became automatic, ingrained in their very beings. Every man aboard understood his mission. They were returning to the Pacific, not as victims seeking survival, but as hunters pursuing vengeance. In the mess halls, sailors spoke of revenge with the quiet certainty of those who had tasted defeat and refused to accept it. In the engine rooms, mechanics coaxed every possible revolution from the turbines, pushing the machinery to its limits and beyond. Helena wasn't merely repaired, she was reborn as an instrument of vengeance and retribution. By July 1942, Helena was ready for action once more. As she passed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, bound for the South Pacific, her crew lined the rails. Some waved at family members on shore, while others stared westward toward the enemy who had drawn first blood. The machine gun cruiser was heading to war, and her crew carried with them the memory of Pearl Harbor and the determination to make the Japanese pay dearly for their attack. The Solomon Islands in late 1942 represented a green hell, where American and Japanese forces bled for every yard of jungle and every stretch of water. Guadalcanal, with its strategically vital airfield, had become the grinding wheel upon which the Pacific War was being slowly decided. Every night, Japanese destroyers and cruisers raced down the slot, the channel between the Solomon chains, carrying reinforcements and bombardment ammunition to their garrison. By early October, Helena served in Task Force 64 under Rear Admiral Norman Scott. Unlike many American officers who still thought in traditional battleship terms, Scott understood that radar and rapid-fire capabilities would dominate these new waters. He drilled his ships relentlessly in night combat tactics, though he made the curious decision to fly his flag aboard USS San Francisco rather than the radar-equipped Helena, a choice that would have significant consequences. October 11, 1942, marked the approach of reckoning. American reconnaissance aircraft had spotted Admiral Aritomo Goto's force steaming toward Guadalcanal, 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers carrying reinforcements and bombardment ammunition. Scott positioned his force off Cape Esperance, ready to execute what would become history's first significant American naval victory. As darkness fell, Helena's radar operators detected enemy ships on their scopes, phosphorescent blips that appeared at 27,700 yards. Helena had found the Japanese before they even knew American forces were hunting them. What followed was organized chaos as Scott's column executed a maneuver that accidentally placed the American force across the Japanese T, the perfect position for a devastating ambush. On Helena's bridge, Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, who had assumed command in September, grew increasingly frustrated as his radar clearly showed enemy ships at 5,000 yards, practically point-blank range, yet Scott had not authorized opening fire. Finally, at 23446, Scott's ambiguous acknowledgement to another query was interpreted as permission to engage. Helena's turrets, already trained on the enemy, erupted in controlled violence. The first salvos caught the heavy cruiser Furutaka completely unprepared. 6-inch shells slammed into her bridge, killing Admiral Goto instantly and wounding her captain. The Japanese admiral died believing his own ships were firing upon him, never imagining that Americans could strike from darkness with such precision and coordination. Helena's guns achieved rates of fire that seemed almost impossible to Japanese observers. Spent brass casings rolled across her decks like golden rain as loaders and gun crews worked in perfect synchronization, their movements refined through months of drilling. Muzzle flashes lit up the night sky, illuminating the chaos below and earning Helena the nickname that would define her throughout her combat career. The heavy cruiser Furutaka attempted to shield the flagship but sailed directly into a steel hurricane. Helena's shells found her torpedo tubes and the long lance torpedoes stored there, detonating them on the Japanese ship's own deck. Furutaka burned like a Viking funeral pyre before sliding beneath the black waters. In 14 minutes, the engagement was concluded. Helena had fired over 1,400 rounds, her gun barrels glowing cherry red in the darkness. The Battle of Cape Esperance represented America's first clear surface victory against the Imperial Navy, proof that American cruisers could fight and win at night, the enemy's chosen battlefield. As dawn broke, Oil slicks and floating debris marked where Japanese ships had died. Helena's exhausted but exhilarated crew had tasted victory for the first time, and they wanted more. November 1942 brought desperation to both sides, locked in combat at Guadalcanal. The Japanese prepared a massive reinforcement convoy, while Admiral Scott's victorious task force, now led by Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, stood as the only barrier between the enemy and Henderson Field. Callahan, brave but inexperienced in night combat, made the same critical error as Scott by choosing San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. On the night of November 12-13, Helena's SG radar again proved its worth. At 01:24, her operators detected Japanese ships entering Iron Bottom Sound. The waters off Guadalcanal littered with so many wrecks they had earned their grim nickname. 2 Japanese battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, led a bombardment force intended to pulverize Henderson Field and its invaluable American aircraft. What erupted at Juo 48 was less a coordinated battle than a bar fight fought with 14-inch guns. The American column practically collided with the Japanese force in the darkness. Ships fired at point-blank range, sometimes uncertain whether their targets were friend or foe. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness while star shells burst overhead and tracer rounds crisscrossed the sky like deadly fireworks. Helena's radar gave her a critical edge in this melee of confusion. While other ships struggled to identify targets through visual means, her fire control systems tracked Japanese vessels with electronic precision. She opened fire on what her crew believed was a battleship, likely Hiei, at just 4,200 yards. Her rapid-fire salvos walked up and down the enemy's length, sparking fires and explosions across the Japanese warship's superstructure. The destroyer Akatsuki made the fatal error of illuminating Helena with her searchlight. Every American ship that could bring weapons to bear immediately concentrated on the illuminated destroyer. Helena's 6-inch shells joined 5-inch and 8-inch rounds from other American ships in a convergence of naval gunfire that literally disintegrated the Japanese destroyer. Akatsuki vanished in a massive explosion, taking nearly all her crew with her. Helena then shifted her fire to 3 additional destroyers, her guns cycling so rapidly that Japanese survivors later reported believing the Americans had developed a new automatic cannon weapon. 1 destroyer limped away burning while another went dead in the water, and the third fled into the darkness trailing smoke and flame. Throughout the engagement, Helena danced between incoming salvos, her engineers pushing her turbines to and beyond their design limits. At one critical moment, San Francisco crossed directly between Helena and her target, forcing a check fire that probably saved American lives. The confusion of that night claimed Admiral Callahan and Captain Casson Young of San Francisco, brave men killed by American shells in the fog of battle. After 40 minutes of point-blank savagery, the Japanese withdrew. The battleship Hiei, battered by dozens of hits including many from Helena, lingered behind with jammed rudders. American aircraft would finish her the next morning, marking the first Japanese battleship lost to the Americans in the war. Helena emerged from the engagement with only 1 man dead and minor damage, her gunners having fired over 1,500 rounds with her barrels shot out from the sustained rate of fire. She had helped stop the Tokyo Express cold, and without that bombardment, Henderson Field would have been destroyed, eliminating the American aircraft that would savage Japanese transports in the coming days. Between the legendary battles, Helena settled into a grinding routine that tested men as thoroughly as combat itself. The Solomon Islands offered no respite from danger. If Japanese shells didn't kill you, tropical diseases might. Helena's crew developed the 1,000-yard stare common to Guadalcanal veterans, men aged beyond their years by constant vigilance. Life aboard followed the rhythm of war, general quarters at dawn and dusk when submarines preferred to attack, Days spent bombarding Japanese positions on Guadalcanal, turning jungle strongpoints into moonscapes with her guns, and nights patrolling the slot with radar operators straining to catch the first glimpse of enemy vessels. The crew developed their own culture, born of shared danger and common purpose. Helena's laundry somehow maintained pressed uniforms even after battle. The ship's band, Helena's Hotshots, played swing music on deck between actions, their jazzy renditions of standards like Blues in the Night carrying across the water to other ships. Food consisted of whatever the supply ships brought: spam, powdered eggs, and coffee strong enough to float a wrench. Fresh vegetables were memories, and the ice cream maker, when it worked, produced the most valuable commodity in the South Pacific. Men would trade almost anything for a Dixie cup of vanilla. Captain Hoover proved a steady hand during his tenure, understanding that survival meant victory in these waters. He drilled his crew constantly, but also knew when to ease the pressure, allowing movie nights on the fantail and boxing matches on the forecastle, small pleasures that reminded men what they were fighting for. His relief in November 1942 for allegedly failing to adequately report the torpedoing of USS Juneau struck the crew hard. They had just fought through hell together, and now their skipper was gone over what many saw as a bureaucratic vendetta. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, who assumed command in December 1942, had to win over a suspicious crew but would lead them through their final battles. December 1942 and January 1943 blurred together in routine and exhaustion. Helena bombarded Vila and Munda, supported troop convoys, and chased phantoms on radar screens. Her crew became experts at reading the sea and sky, knowing that survival often depended on spotting a torpedo wake or bomb release a second before the enemy did. By February 1943, Helena desperately needed yard time. Her engines wheezed, her guns showed worn rifling, and her hull bore the scars of near misses. The voyage to Sydney, Australia felt like sailing to paradise. Fresh food, cold beer, and women who spoke English awaited. For a few precious weeks, Helena's men remembered what peace felt like, but wars don't pause for liberty. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, her guns refreshed and her crew rested for the next phase of the island campaign. As spring 1943 turned to summer, American forces prepared to leap up the Solomon chain. New Georgia, with its airfield at Munda, represented the next bloody step toward Tokyo. Helena would play her part in preliminary bombardments that turned Japanese positions into rubble. The routine had become deadly familiar: slip into contested waters under darkness, pummel assigned targets with artillery, and escape before dawn brought retribution from Japanese aircraft. On May 13, Helena led a bombardment group against Vila, her shells walking through fuel dumps and barracks with methodical precision. The Japanese, learning from experience, had moved most assets inland, but Helena's guns still found plenty to destroy. June 1943 brought intensified operations as intelligence reported massive Japanese reinforcement efforts. Every American cruiser worked overtime to interdict these movements. Helena's crew, veterans now, prepared their ship with grim efficiency. Extra ammunition came aboard until her magazines bulged. Damage control materials were prepositioned throughout the ship. Men wrote letters home just in case. On June 30, Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia, began. Helena provided fire support for landings at Renova, her 6-inch shells clearing jungle in 100-yard swaths. Japanese shore batteries replied sporadically, their splashes walking toward Helena until counter-battery fire silenced them. July 4, 1943, Independence Day, found Helena bombarding Munda airfield. The Japanese had reinforced their anti-aircraft positions and black puffs of flak dotted the sky. Helena's anti-aircraft guns replied, their 40mm rounds creating their own fireworks display in a demonstration of democracy versus fascism traced in tracer rounds. That evening, Helena refueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for another night's work. Intelligence had spotted another Tokyo Express run, destroyers racing south with reinforcements for New Georgia. Task Force 68, with Helena as a key component, would intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew sensed something different about this mission. Perhaps it was the full moon predicted for that night, eliminating the darkness that usually concealed American ships from visual spotting, though their radar would work just as well. Perhaps it was the reports of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the convoy runs. Or perhaps it was simply the law of averages catching up, suggesting that Helena had survived too many battles without serious damage. As July 5 became July 6, Helena entered Kula Gulf for the last time. Her radar operators, the best in the fleet, would spot the enemy first. As always, her guns would speak with their characteristic rapid fury. But this time, the enemy would punch back with a vengeance that even the machine gun cruiser couldn't survive. The moon rose over Kula Gulf like a spotlight, transforming the black waters silver and robbing the Americans of the concealment darkness usually provided. Admiral Walden Ainsworth, flying his flag in Honolulu, led Task Force 68 into the Gulf just after midnight on July 6, 1943. Helena followed in column, her radar already painting contacts to the northwest. The Japanese had learned from their previous encounters. Admiral Teruo Akiyama's reinforcement group included 10 destroyers armed with the deadly Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, weapons that could reach out 20,000 yards at 49 knots. More critically, the Japanese had finally developed tactics to counter American radar advantages. At 01:36, Helena's radar detected the enemy at 22,000 yards. For once, Japanese radar operators matched American detection, spotting Task Force 68 almost simultaneously. Both sides began their deadly approach, knowing this would be a gunfight where speed and accuracy mattered more than armor. At 057, Admiral Ainsworth ordered the attack. Helena's turrets, already tracking their targets, erupted immediately. Her first salvos targeted the destroyer Nagatsuki, Admiral Akiyama's flagship. The range was 11,000 yards, comfortable for Helena's experienced gun crews. Nagatsuki never had a chance. Helena's second salvo found her, and the following salvos transformed the destroyer into a burning pyre. 6-inch shells detonated her torpedo warheads, shattered her bridge, and opened her hull. Admiral Akiyama died in the opening minutes, his last sight, the muzzle flashes that spelled his doom. But even as Nagatsuki died, her sister ships had launched their long lances. 10 destroyers fired volleys of torpedoes before turning away at high speed, a tactic that traded gunfire for torpedo accuracy. Nearly 50 torpedoes now raced through Kula Gulf's waters toward the American column. Helena shifted fire to the destroyer Suzuki, her radar-directed shells finding the target despite the range. But she had made a critical error. Her initial salvos used flashless powder carefully hoarded for night actions. When those special charges ran out, she switched to standard propellant. Each salvo now lit up the night like lightning, clearly marking Helena's position for Japanese torpedo directors calculating their intercept courses. At 02:03, Helena's luck ran out. 3 long lances found her in quick succession, and the machine gun cruiser's death began. The first torpedo struck forward of turret 1. The explosion was catastrophic. Either her forward magazine detonated, or the torpedo's 1,080-pound warhead simply obliterated her bow. Turret 1 vanished in a pillar of flame that reached 200 feet skyward. The blast rolled through the ship, buckling bulkheads and throwing men against steel walls like rag dolls. Before damage control could respond, the second and third torpedoes struck amidships below her armor belt. These hits broke Helena's keel, the ship's backbone. Her engine rooms flooded instantly, turbines screaming to a stop as seawater rushed in. Electrical power failed, plunging internal compartments into darkness, broken only by battle lanterns and flames. Captain Cecil immediately recognized the fatal nature of Helena's wounds. With her keel broken, the ship was already beginning to jackknife. He passed the order, "All captains dread, abandon ship." But Helena's gunners weren't finished. Even as she settled, her aft turrets continued firing, their crews refusing to leave their posts until the last possible moment. Turret 4 fired until seawater flooded the handling rooms. Turret 5's crew manually trained their guns, firing until the list became too severe to elevate their barrels. The ship broke into 3 sections. The bow section, everything forward of Turret 2, had already vanished. The stern section, containing nearly 400 men, floated independently. The center section, containing the bridge and most of the engineering spaces, rolled over and sank within minutes. Men struggled in the oil-covered water, some wounded, all shocked by the sudden transition from combat to survival. The destroyer Nicholas, risking torpedo attack, moved in to rescue survivors. Her crew pulled exhausted men aboard while her guns engaged Japanese destroyers trying to finish off Helena's survivors. Dawn on July 6 found Kula Gulf littered with the debris of battle and nearly 500 Helena survivors still in the water. The bow and stern sections remained afloat, serving as temporary life rafts for hundreds of men. But Japanese aircraft would arrive with daylight, and Admiral Ainsworth faced an agonizing decision. Nicholas and Radford had pulled 739 men from the water during the night, their crews forming human chains to haul oil-soaked survivors aboard. But radar showed Japanese warships still in the area, and dawn meant certain air attack. Ainsworth ordered his ships to withdraw, leaving hundreds of Helena's crew behind. For the men still in the water, July 6 became a test of endurance and will. The tropical sun burned exposed skin, while salt water tortured wounds. Sharks drawn by blood circled the survivors. Men formed groups, supporting the wounded and sharing the few life rafts available. On Helena's floating stern section, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chu organized the survivors. The stern still had some food and water, plus medical supplies. Chu established watches, rationed supplies, and maintained discipline. When Japanese float planes strafed the survivors, men dove beneath the twisted steel for cover. That night, 2 American destroyers attempted a rescue, but were driven off by Japanese warships. The survivors spent another night clinging to wreckage, their numbers diminishing as wounded men slipped away and sharks took their toll. The story might have ended there, but Coast Watcher Reverend WWII Sylvester on La Vela Island reported the survivors' location and coordinated with local natives to guide rescue efforts. On the night of July 7-8, destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with fast transports, Dent and Waters, returned to Kula Gulf. Using whaleboats and rubber rafts, they pulled 165 men from the water and the floating stern section. The stern finally sank during the rescue, as if Helena had waited to ensure her crew was safe before taking her final plunge. But 88 survivors had drifted to Japanese-held La Vela. For a week, they evaded enemy patrols with help from native scouts and coast watchers. Living on coconuts and rainwater, moving only at night, they made their way to the island's northwest coast. On July 13, destroyers Taylor, Maury, Gridley, and Ralph Talbot executed a daring daylight rescue, evacuating the last of Helena's survivors under the noses of Japanese forces. The final tally was sobering. Of Helena's crew of 868, some 168 men died in Kula Gulf or during the rescue operations, but 700 survived, saved by the courage of destroyer crews who risked everything, and the determination of survivors who refused to give up. Helena's story could have ended in Kula Gulf, another casualty in the grinding Solomon Islands campaign. But legends don't die easily. In Navy wardrooms and enlisted clubs, veterans told stories of the cruiser that fired faster than any ship had a right to. Her rapid-fire broadsides became the stuff of mythology, growing with each retelling. The Navy recognized Helena's extraordinary service with 7 battle stars and the first-ever Navy unit commendation awarded to a ship. The citation specifically mentioned Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf, 3 battles where Helena's guns helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Her influence extended beyond medals and citations. Helena's combat experiences drove changes in American naval tactics and technology. Her successful use of radar in night battles became standard doctrine. The importance of flashless powder was written in blood. Damage control procedures were revised based on her loss. For decades, Helena rested undisturbed in Kula Gulf, her exact location unknown. Her survivors held reunions, their numbers dwindling each year, but their memories remained sharp. They remembered the sound of her guns, the feel of her deck plates, the friends who didn't make it home. In April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel, RV Petrel, located Helena in 2,800 feet of water. The remote cameras revealed her hull number, 50, still visible on her stern. Her turrets remained trained out, as if ready to resume the fight. The discovery brought closure to surviving crew members and their families, confirming their ship's final resting place. Today, Helena serves as more than a war grave. She represents the thousands of sailors who fought the decisive naval battles of World War II. Her story teaches timeless lessons about courage, determination, and sacrifice. The ship that survived Pearl Harbor to become the scourge of the Tokyo Express proved that heroes aren't always invincible. Sometimes they're simply too stubborn to quit. From her birth in Depression-era Brooklyn to her death in the tropical waters of the Solomons, Helena embodied the American war effort. Built by workers who needed jobs, crewed by boys who became men, and commanded by officers learning to fight a new kind of war, she was democracy made steel. The Japanese were right to fear the ship they called the machine gun cruiser. But Helena was more than rapid-firing guns and advanced radar. She was 868 Americans who refused to accept defeat, who turned tragedy at Pearl Harbor into triumph at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal. Even in death, she extracted a price, her guns firing until the water claimed them. In the depths of Kula Gulf, Helena keeps her last watch. Coral grows on her turrets, fish swim through her passages, but her legacy lives on. She remains what she always was, the fighting ship that earned her nickname through sheer determination and a testament to the generation that saved the world. They called her the machine gun cruiser, and she lived up to her name until the very end. In the annals of naval history, few ships fought harder, died better, or left a prouder legacy than USS Helena CL-50. She was, as her crew always knew, one hell of a fighting ship.